Greetings, everyone. This is episode 736 of People Behind the Science. I'm Dr. Marie McNeely, and today I'll be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Alexis, or Lekki Wood. This episode is made possible with support from our sponsor, New England Biolabs. Listeners, are you curious how molecular biology is moving forward around the world? Hear from the scientists who are driving discovery and expanding applications of existing technologies on the New England Biolabs podcast, Lessons from Lab and Life. Host Lydia Morrison interviews revered scientists working in genetics, synthetic biology, diagnostics, molecular cloning, and other fields. Get ready to explore the cutting edge of science and learn what these remarkable scientists have to offer. Don't miss out on the opportunity to hear exclusive stories about the world of laboratory research. Tune in to Lessons from Lab and Life today, wherever you listen to podcasts. And in our conversation today, Lekki is going to talk more about her own life and research. So listeners, get ready to meet another one of our outstanding people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Lekki Wood. So, Lekki, welcome to our show today. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
Well, Lekki, we are thrilled to have you with us, and I'm looking forward to learning more about you and your work in our conversation today. But let me first start by giving our listeners a little bit of background. So, listeners, Lekki is an associate professor at the USDA ARS Children's Nutrition Research Center in the Division of Pediatrics-Nutrition at Baylor College of Medicine. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology and philosophy with honors from the University of Warwick. Afterwards, she completed her postgraduate certificate in education at the University of Cambridge. And then Alexis enrolled in graduate school at King's College London, where she earned her master's degree in social, genetic, and developmental psychology and her PhD in statistical genetics. Next, she conducted postdoctoral research at the University of Alabama, focusing on statistical genetics and epidemiology. Lekki served on the faculty at the University of Texas Health Sciences Center for about 2 years before joining the faculty there at Baylor, where she is today. Now, she has received a variety of awards and honors for her work, including the Young Investigator Award from the International Congress on ADHD and the Young Investigator Award from the Department of Pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine. In addition, she has received the Scott Grundy Award for Excellence in Metabolism Research and the Mark Bieber Award for Excellence in Nutrition Research, both from the American Heart Association. She was also named a Fellow of the American Heart Association in 2015. And today, Lekki, we're excited to get to know you as a scientist, of course, but also as a person. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not hard at work doing science?
So I go to the gym most days. I have 2 children. I raise those. I have a German Shepherd who is very energetic and I look after her. But I don't know how I would describe those as things I like to do. What I really like to do, a little surprisingly, is play Pokemon cards.
Awesome.
I play that competitively. And I build a lot of Lego to the extent that I have a 6-foot by 6-foot city built out of Lego in my garage.
Oh, that is amazing. Now, are the kids allowed to play with the Legos too, or is that your hobby?
I try to let them play without hovering over them. They're technically allowed to play with them, yes, if they ask and they're careful with them.
I think that is awesome. So what are their favorite activities to do these days?
So my son plays Pokemon cards with me, and we will be going to the regional tournament together. My daughter likes tap. She likes reading. She's only 8 years old. She likes crafts and making things.
That is phenomenal. It sounds like you and your family have a lot of different activities and hobbies to keep you busy outside of science, but you are doing phenomenal work in the lab as well. So I'd love to chat about that next. Lekki, how do you describe what you do in science to someone who's not in your field specifically, or perhaps is outside science altogether?
What I try to do is to understand how food influences our health. And the approach I take is to look at the chain of changes we see in the body from the moment that food is put in our mouth through to it being digested and absorbed and all the molecules that arrive. And then where do those molecules go? How do they affect our organs if they do? And then sort of a newer thing I say is that once we start looking at those intermediate stages, those molecules, I can look at differences between people and within people. So perhaps I get a lot of molecule A from eating a given food, but you do not. Or perhaps you get a lot of that molecule in the morning, but not the evening. So I try to look at how food influences our health and tailor that to individuals.
This is fascinating, and I think tremendously important work to be doing these days with all of the health and diabetes and obesity and all these different problems that people in our country and across the world are having. But do you find that this fascination with food and nutrition spills out into your everyday life as well?
It does, but perhaps in a surprising way. Certainly there, I would say, a lot of very common notions about how food might influence our health that are not reflected in the science, and I don't ascribe to those. And when you get into the nitty-gritty of the studies, including my own and their limitations, I think you realize that it's not immediately causal. So what I can summarize is say it does spill in, but I'm a lot more relaxed. People are often say, I'm surprised to see someone in nutrition science eating X. Yes, I say for sure. I do watch and I care about what I and my family eat across the week. But I think it actually strangely makes me more relaxed.
Well, I love to hear that. And it's great to hear that you have this passion for the work that you do. And I think being excited about the research can keep you motivated and inspired. But I think also on those tough days, it's helpful to have a quote or a saying, maybe a mantra, or even just a force to keep you going in the morning. So do you have one of these yourself, Lekki, whether it's a motivational quote or just something specifically that helps keep you motivated and inspired?
I have friends who are very into motivational quotes, and it really helps them. Mm-hmm. I spoke to my partner today, and I'd had a quote sort of lined up, and he just looked at me in horror. He actually does science communications. What he encouraged me to share is that I'm a team scientist, and I believe in a team approach, both within my team and then all different findings in science and all different branches of science. The other thing I was thinking about quotes was sometimes I feel like I just get up every day and I put my feet in front of the other one after one because that's what I do. And I get into my office and I start. I mean, I might love what I do, but you're right. Some days it's hard. And I think being part of a team helps that, right? Because there are other parts of the machine that you can help and contribute towards. So I said there was a quote, teamwork makes the dream work. He said, that's not a quote. You can't say that. But something motivational about teams and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and contributing would be where I would go.
I love that, Lekki. And I think it is so important to be working together to solve some of these big scientific problems that we're facing in the world today. I think particularly in the work that you do, this point that you brought up of being interdisciplinary and working with a lot of people from different fields to kind of start to chip away at these big problems.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we talked about motivation. I think people can also help keep you motivated. You mentioned this teamwork being critically important. Are there people who float to the top of your mind, Lekki, who maybe were part of your team at a point in your career, or maybe just a mentor or a role model or someone who really inspired you and helped you get to where you are today?
I feel like I could not just mention so many people, but describe and give gratitude and admiration to so many people. But I actually keep landing on my PhD supervisor. She was young. I think she was in her 30s. She's actually quite young to be leading big studies and mentoring people. She was female. And we certainly had challenges in our relationship at times. But I think of her in the following ways. She was certainly breaking new ideas in science fearlessly. I feel like she had ideas about cognition underlying attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that were new and exciting. And she was just prepared to go all in the quest to see, was she right? Could this help? And she was very formal. When I first met her and was her student, she was quite strict. But as I got to know her, she was a mom and she would talk about the challenges of that. And she was sort of a developmental psychologist. And sometimes she would just throw her hands up in the air and say, I don't know why my child is doing this. I can't get to stop. I'm going to leave it to the dad. And so I got to see this incredibly successful, admirable scientist also be a human being and be funny and be a mom and have sort of mess in her life. And I guess what goes hand in hand in that, I realized once I'd been through 4 years of training with her, she had an amazing dose of humility. So she had a research project and I agreed to do some analyses. I did some preliminary analyses and I found a finding that I didn't know at the time really overturned what she had found previously. She was kind of known for saying X. And I said, I'm seeing X is not true. And it just didn't bother her. I remember clearly her, and I didn't sort of know the history. I didn't know I was waiting to something sensitive, but she just nodded and she just said, if you have found that, you'd better be really sure you found that.
Right.
And we will get you another data set to do it in. And we did it and it replicated and she published it twice and really said, this is actually how I see it. So I just felt she was so strong and so powerful and successful and so smart. But there was this humility behind her. I also remember saying to her as I left the program to come to America, thank you. You've taught me so much. Everything I have now is a reflection of what you've given me, some words to that effect. And she just said, oh, you have far exceeded what I ever gave you, Lekki. It's an amazing trajectory. And whether that's true or not, to have the confidence, but also the humility to just have people go on their own trajectories and be complementary. She just put all that together in one package.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like an amazing mentor. And I love this humility plus open-mindedness that you pointed out there and being able to accept these results that overturned something that was in the literature already and something that she had kind of built her name and her reputation upon. I think that takes remarkable courage and discipline, I think, as well.
Yes. And I think she had a real dedication to finding the truth. I don't like sort of say science absolutely gets at the truth because it's a long process and we have findings to put it together. But she was invested in scientific honesty because she believed in the value of it, I think.
Well, I think that is so critical. And you mentioned that this PhD advisor was a big influence on your career. Maybe we'll rewind it back even further a bit, Lekki. Where did your interest in science in this particular area of nutrition begin? And how did you get on this path?
It probably began when I was about 2 or 3 years old, and my parents would put a limit on the number of why questions I could ask per day. But why? Why? And they would give us, but why? Why is the boat floating because of this? But why? Why does that happen like this? Why? And so they say, okay, all right, you get like this many why questions. I wanted to be an actress. And when that didn't seem like maybe viable, I wanted to be a corporate solicitor. It's corporate law in England. And I really picked a trajectory towards that. And I followed it right through to my undergraduate degree. And when I was having the forms to apply for law school, the questions they were asking, which were very expected and reasonable, you know, what experience do you have that you would bring to this kind of career? I just realized I didn't want to do it. I remember thinking I want to help, and I don't want to say that people in law don't help. I don't want to overstate that scientists do. But I think what I was feeling was I want to be more connected to people, perhaps. So I started a trajectory towards being a clinical psychologist. I wanted to work with children with traumatic brain injury. And I became a teacher for children with special educational needs in London. And I loved that. And although I was on the teaching plane and I wanted to move into the psychology, psychiatry plane, I interacted with clinical specialists and I just felt there were so many things we didn't know. There were so many answers I was given about the children I was working with that I could tell didn't fit that child. And there was no explanation. There was no understanding. I would say, well, you've told me this child can do X and only X, and you're correct. We're struggling with doing X in the classroom. But when they go home, they don't have these challenges. We're seeing them do very cognitively advanced things, and there was no answer. And I say, well, what is it about their home that can elicit these skills that I am not getting at in my classroom? And there weren't answers. So at that point, I just said, I want to go back into research to generate more knowledge that help us solve these sort of fundamental problems. And that was it. I did a PhD, and then it was pretty linear. PhD, postdoc, faculty.
Absolutely. And then what sparked this interest in kind of getting into the genetic components?
So the genetic component, I did genetic psychiatry, and we used genes in a really interesting way. Actually, this was very much the PhD supervisor I mentioned. She used genes to link cognitive patterns. So some of the problem solving, for example, or our attention span, or how we can regulate our attention, or how we can inhibit a response, things like that. She wanted to say these cognitive processes are very, very important in children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is not just what we think of as the hyperactivity and so on. There is something fundamental, but it was very challenging at the time because that was how we diagnosed it, right? And when we saw children have some cognitive challenges, a lot of people maybe, and this is somewhat simplifying it, but would be tempted to say, well, we don't have a good learning environment for children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is secondary. These cognitive challenges are sort of the problem of the schools and so on. And what she used was the genetic information to really say, no, this is fundamental to the condition. And it just used genes in such a unique and powerful way. And indeed, I have ADHD. I was diagnosed as an adult. And they actually use now those cognitive patterns, scores on tests for those cognitive processes diagnostically. So that's really how I got into genes, is using them as a tool to understand complex disorders, which I just thought was really cool.
Absolutely. And then how did nutrition enter the picture as well?
So I didn't measure any genes in my PhD. I used twin data where we know on average what extent of the genome is shared. So identical twins share 100%. Fraternal twins, non-identical twins share on average 50% to infer genetic sharing and sort of do mathematical modeling. And I thought it'd be really cool to measure genes and use a named gene or actual molecular information. And so I came to do the same cognitive processing and patterning that I'd used in ADHD in obesity risk. And I jumped the pond and I landed in Alabama and I turned up and my postdoc fell through.
Oh, no.
I'd already left my country and got a visa. So I more or less did one in cardiovascular disease epidemiology, which was a little biological for me, but tangentially was very relevant to cardiovascular disease risk is nutrition, which is both molecular, both physiological, but it's also behavioral. So there was a strong behavioral component I could bring in there. And that got me into the nutrition world, really.
Very interesting. So what was your reaction, I guess, when you arrived here in the United States ready to start this position and the position wasn't available anymore?
So I will say, yes, it wasn't like my old institution were kind of going, well, you're on your own, find something else. It wasn't like that at all. It was just, you need to sit in this department and work with these people, which wasn't challenging. I was in this new group. I had never used genes per se. Someone gave me an easy project to sort of get my feet wet and all the findings were null. So I took it to the lab group and they basically said, oh, where in the gene is this information coming from? And I was like, I don't know what you mean. They said, well, which part of the gene is it coming from? And I said, genes have parts. And they just looked at me and I think they were like, this girl is dead to us.
Oh, no.
I mean, I sort of feel like if you're a statistician and someone says there's a p-value or you can add numbers together, you'd be like, I can't help you. This is too basic. So it was very challenging, but I was supported certainly by my mentors at my institution. But it was tough. It was tough.
Absolutely. And then when you started thinking about next steps after completing that postdoc, what led you ultimately to Baylor?
Well, I went to University of Texas School of Public Health. They were starting up a new center, an innovation center, and they really wanted people to come and work on creative new ideas. So to say, we look at problem X in this way, and there are tons of studies moving forward. I want to look at it in a different way and just do that sort of groundwork to get those new ideas out there, rather than focus on traditional science approach of here's my hypothesis, I test it, I do the next study. And that just seemed very cool. It was helmed by a lady called Roberta Ness, who wrote books on creativity and innovation. And I loved that idea. She loved me, and I went to go do that. But that also closed not long after I turned up.
Your poor career path kept hitting dead ends.
I feel like this is a message, never employ me because something will go wrong. But so my department were incredibly supportive, and I happened to be in a cardiovascular disease epidemiology department. So they said, you can do some more of this. But it wasn't just the best fit. I also wanted to bring in a behavioral angle and not lose my psychology roots, and particularly my child development roots, developmental psychology, and just across the road. So Baylor is literally across the road. I moved my office stuff in a little red wagon by pulling it across. That's how I came here to work in the Children's Nutrition Research Center. And my role here is probably has the advantage of being a little more interdisciplinary.
Well, I love this story. And I love, as you alluded to, that it really highlights that you can't always predict what's going to happen in your career path. And sometimes you just have to go with the flow, accept the opportunities as they present themselves and move forward. So I know you're there at Baylor. You've got some phenomenal work going on in your lab. I'd love to chat about it. Lekki, do you have a particular project going on at the moment that you are the most excited about?
So I talked about looking at the molecules that arise from the digestion, absorption of our food. And I recently just got funded from the beef industry. They're very supportive of this overall approach. They're very excited. We had one study that looked at just the metabolites, so one form of these molecules. And having worked with them and produced this research, they sort of, I think, got to know me as a scientist and got to know my passion and my vision, I guess. So they've invested another 2 years to look at red meat intake and what really happens in the body when we eat it and what might those molecules do or perhaps not do, and to personalize that a little bit. So maybe we see this molecule that's associated with red meat intake, but really it's because the people eating the red meat have this characteristic more on average, and that's what this molecule picks up. Or maybe this molecule only arrives in certain people. So I'm really excited because they're just wonderful people to work with. They're very invested in novel science and giving scientists quite a bit of freedom, which is more unusual now. And it's also a really cool opportunity to overturn a dearly held notion, or at least challenge, or at least try to substantiate, whichever way it goes, a notion. So I said that I'm actually more relaxed about my eating being a nutritionist because I see the complexities and I see perhaps the bigger picture rather than the one study that hits the headline.
It's not as black and white, I think, as a lot of people think.
Exactly. And there's some very strongly held opinions that eating red meat is bad for your health. And I just don't think the data show that. I don't think they necessarily don't show that, but they certainly don't show that. And the chance to really challenge that and say, can we reassess this? Can we almost write the ground rules of nutrition? Perhaps they have to change or be tweaked. And it's exciting to me because I think of red meat, it's very palatable in some ways. It can be affordable, not obviously all forms. It tends to be liked. So it's often for many communities very accessible. And the idea of coming back to people and saying, you're doing okay. This is what you like. This is okay.
Right.
Sometimes feel like that's the message. I have all these diet studies, food studies hit the media really easily. And I'm happy sort of to do these interviews. Oh, you found X. Yes, I did. You found this association. And they always say, do you have anything else you'd like to add? And I'm always like, people are probably doing much better than they think they are. People who are feeling guilty or feeling bad about what they're eating or feel overwhelmed, I bet you, for all sorts of reasons, doing way better than you think you are. And you shouldn't feel undue stress or pressure necessarily. And I think this, in a bigger scale, feeds into that. So I'm super excited about this project. We're just refining the title, which is more creative than is my outlook, but that's fun too.
Absolutely. And I think as technology and tools advance, I think it is important for science as a whole to revisit some of these old sort of long held beliefs and these questions that we thought we knew the answers to in whole, because I think so many cases, the story is a lot more complicated than we initially thought it was.
I agree. There's all sorts of reasons why things sort of get overturned, although I do some basic introduction lectures on nutritional epidemiology, and I'd say it can be controversial because it appears like scientists are changing their mind. Not sure that's really the case. Sometimes we do get new evidence. We get new ways of doing studies. We get, new technology or even just new study designs. But I do say often, I'm not sure these scientists are changing their mind. I think the media is taking one or two studies and making a story that a scientist would never make. And then that surprisingly turns out not to be accurate. And that's what we see going on. But it's definitely good to be open-minded and to really think sometimes you want to take a finding and take it further and deepen it and absolutely build on it. And other times you might want to look around and just sort of say, we really think that? Are we sure? Because perhaps we got some information from other fields that now make us question that. So let's re-examine it.
Oh, absolutely. Very interesting work, Lekki. And listeners, if you're looking to expand your scientific knowledge with more great podcasts, New England Biolab's podcast, Lessons from Lab and Life, is your source for staying informed about the most up-to-date molecular biology breakthroughs. Host Lydia Morrison interviews prominent scientists and delves into their research to uncover how their findings affect society in meaningful ways. Tune in to learn from experts and get a glimpse of the cutting-edge advancements being made by scientists around the globe. Don't miss out on this opportunity to gain new knowledge and stay informed on the latest discoveries. Tune in to Lessons from Lab and Life today, wherever you listen to podcasts. And Lekki, as you've alluded to, you've run into some challenges in your research and in your career path that you've had to overcome. And I think it is critical to talk about these challenges because I think oftentimes people, and maybe particularly trainees and early career scientists, may only see this shiny facade where it looks like research should be easy and that scientists really have it all together. But that is often not the case. These failures, these challenges, these struggles are very common. So do you have a story of your own of a major failure that you've had or something that you really struggled with? And if so, could you tell us about it?
Man, I have about 50. I feel like we've covered two of them. I, in the last 7 years, had a very, very challenging and difficult divorce. My children were young, and that certainly, whether I wanted it to or not, impacted my productivity and just my ability to focus and think as a scientist. So that's something I'm very open about. And much as we would like our personal lives not to influence our professional, they do. And we are people and humans, and ignoring that is not going to help anyone. I think, though, I said that I use genes in this way in ADHD, really my supervisor's work. And it had been so cool and so powerful. And I said, okay, I'm going to come and do this with cognition and obesity. That fell through. Okay, I'm going to come and do this with perhaps nutrition and chronic disease. And the first thing I tried was actually, rather than genetics, lipidomics. So all the molecules that are lipids, cholesterols, things like that. And it didn't really work. I will say it was a cool question and I got a cool answer and did some great science. But I felt like after 3 years, the bottom line was, this is never going to reach clinics. Lipidomics is too expensive and it's not giving enough extra information compared to what we have. I then moved to other technologies, other omics, and they weren't working out. And then I did genomics for about 6 or 7 years. And the approach I used, I don't think gave me the answers I wanted or gave me the satisfaction I needed. Some people still do that research and they're fantastic. And maybe I just don't see it. But there was a point in 2020 where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm not getting funding. My papers, I'm working with these large groups. I'm working with great people. And the answer seems to be, we were very interested in the question, do genes alter the effect of your food on your health? And it was like, they probably do, but they might not. And if they do, we can't tell you which ones. And I was like, for 7 years and all this money. And again, I will emphasize people doing that work may have a different take-home message, right? They might say, well, we don't see it quite like that. And they would not be wrong. But for me, it was about 2020. I was just completely deflated.
I'm sure the pandemic didn't help.
No, it didn't help anyone. And someone came up to me and said, would you like to do the same, but with metabolomics? And I joke in the talks I give that the answer should have been no. But what I said was, bring it on. Okay, yes, let's do it. And even that I found hard to get off the ground with the challenges of both the divorce and the pandemic, which sort of rolled into each other. Writing it up and getting that message out there was hard. But also I feel like I'd just become a little lost. And it was just a really tough time. It was just really tough. I really seriously looked into leaving academia and science and spoke extensively at people at whether I could use my mathematical modeling skills and so on to move into finance and things. So yeah, it's tough for everyone.
Absolutely. So then, Lekki, obviously you didn't leave academia. What ultimately kept you in science?
I think all along, people have kept me in science. So even when I was at my most flat, I had a research team, often people without advanced science degrees, and they just believed in what I was doing so much. And they were so excited. And they would always have positive things to say about me and the science and say, this is such a great study. And then in the science community, I found a couple of people who really believed in the ideas. And they would take what I was concluding and repeat it back to me. And somehow that made me believe it. Maybe I lost, some self-safety, but this is what it is. This is what it means on a bigger picture. And I started working with some different people. I started working with someone, a senior person I'd had contact with throughout my career on and off, just very professionally. And we actually became friends. And that really helped. And I think that people probably, time and people got me out of it.
Absolutely. And I think it's probably reassuring for a lot of our listeners out there who might be at the end of their rope as well, struggling to decide if they want to stay in science or just try their hand at something else, to hear that in many cases you could have sort of a string of failures or struggles and still recover and still make that decision to be an academic scientist and be successful in it. And I think that's something that everyone has to ultimately make that decision themselves and what makes the most sense and what they're most passionate about. But it sounds like the story at least had a happy ending for you at this point.
I hope it's not ending yet.
Yeah.
So I think you have to also acknowledge the enormous amount of privilege I had to make that decision. I have good medical insurance. I had a lot of mental health support that I was able to do that. While I've definitely had, and I've been open about financial difficulties, I was never worried about actually feeding my children or keeping a roof over their head. So I was able to make it with all those privileges. But I'm glad I'm here. I don't know that I say I'll always be here. And I think that's healthy too. Someone was coming to the Children's Nutrition Research Center right out their postdoc a couple of years ago. And I just met them by Zoom. What was the pandemic? And they told me all these things they'd done. They'd been a wine buyer and a chef, and it was so cool. And I said, oh, and now you're moving into, they wanted to look at, I think, cooking and cooking techniques and how that could influence health, I think, within different cultures. We have a very beautiful, rich, diverse, multicultural environment here in Houston. And I just remember I was like, oh, and so now you're coming into science and you're going to have to get grants and things. And she went, I'll give it a go. If it doesn't work out, I'll do something else. And she was smiling and I was like, oh, that is such a help. In fact, that would be my motivational quote.
Yeah.
I'll give it a go. If it doesn't work out, I'll try something else. So yeah, it's worked out well, but who knows? Who knows where I'll be in 10 years' time?
Definitely. And I think just that flexibility, like we said, that being open-minded is important in science to sort of recognize opportunities as they arise and recognize when things aren't working well and you need to maybe shift or change directions a little bit. And we don't just want to focus on these difficult times, Lekki. I'd love to celebrate your successes as well. I know you've had quite a few. So do you have a favorite success story, whether it was a big win or just a small but particularly meaningful one?
My favorite wins. Teaching is not a part of my job per se. There's, I don't know, some box on my annual evaluation that, I have to say what teaching I did. I'm like, I'm not in medical school. If you want me to teach people how to do surgery, I will, but it's not going to go very well. But I do therefore take opportunities to lecture, particularly at Rice University, which has a large undergrad population. And I just always find that a huge win because I always get people coming up afterwards being excited. And I always get emails. I'd love to follow up. I'd love to be involved, even though I'm not part of their institution and there's no formal, pipeline for that. And even the quietest students, just seeing them, is this linked to so-and-so, this documentary I saw on Netflix, and just seeing them take this science and think critically about what they see in the world and how to put the two together. I just find it a huge win. I love that.
Oh, I think that is absolutely amazing. And I think being able to teach, even if it's not in a sort of traditional classroom setting, but working with people that you're mentoring, working with colleagues, collaborators, students, this is a great part of the career as a scientist and something that I think a lot of people find not only rewarding, but really energizing, seeing people come in with this enthusiasm and excitement about what you're speaking about.
Absolutely. That can definitely get you through a dark day. And also, I get a lot of satisfaction about seeing people take a step they're happy with. So even if it's not in science per se, it's not academia, if they are making it in a way that is going to sound a little American, but good in their heart and they're confident and happy, it just makes my day. It's wonderful.
I love that. And I know science can be a difficult job. And I think it's helpful sometimes to take a step back, as we've alluded to. And we always encourage our listeners to read for fun, give their mind a break from the science. So we always ask people for book recommendations. So Lekki, do you have a favorite book or perhaps one that you've read recently that you enjoyed that you'd like to tell us about?
I will fully confess a lot of what I read is comic books. And I would fully recommend those for anyone interested, but I know they're not everyone's flavor. A book I read that I loved was a fiction book called The Secret Life of Addie LaRue. Essentially, a woman gets to live forever in return, sort of because the bad force is sort of in love with her. It's just a beautiful, because the characters are very complex. The protagonist who is living forever and ultimately you want to sympathize with, she's not perfect. She makes bad decisions. It's really engaging. It's probably the last book I read that kept me up till like 2 a.m.
Oh, wow. A page turner.
Well, yes, it's so absorbing. I just loved the characters and came across it because I'm in a book group that meets once a month. And I was like, I don't think I can go to this month's book group because if anyone says they didn't like it, I'm going to lose it. I'm not going to have a rational, kind discussion about this. So I can personally, if you like that kind of slightly fantasy and romance novel, definitely recommend The Secret Life of Addie LaRue.
Well, excellent recommendation. Lekki, we will add this to our website for our listeners to find when they're looking for their next great read. And we've talked about different aspects of your career, including the work that you do. But one of the things we haven't touched on yet is travel. And I think this is a big part of the life of a scientist, whether you're traveling to work with colleagues, whether you're traveling to teach at different institutions or give lectures, and then also going to conferences. So do you have a favorite place that your science has taken you, Lekki?
Yes. It must have been 2016. I got to go to Australia, to Brisbane. It's very memorable because I took my 8-month-old and my 3-year-old, which was a challenging journey for a 6-day conference, but it was amazing. It was just a great city. I went up and down the coast a little bit. It was a great city. It was interesting. It was clean. There was a lot to see. It wasn't too busy. It was beautiful. I loved it. So that really sticks out in my mind. And I've got great family memories of, well, my 8-month-old was very young, obviously, but my 3-year-old with kangaroos and things like that, and getting to go on a beach and so on. So that was my top pick.
So were there particular things that you recall that you did or saw in Brisbane that you would recommend anyone put on their itinerary?
I did like the winery tour.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously a personal choice if you drink alcohol or not, but it was very beautiful, very interesting. I learned a lot about how wine was made. And I don't know if this is doing a disservice to the richness of that area, but the beaches were incredible. They were fun. They were clean. They were varied. I mean, just going and seeing those and hanging out on those. It was awesome. And I'd highly recommend it.
Oh, it sounds amazing. Listeners, we'll have to make it to Brisbane sometime in our travels. And I know as a scientist, there are often stereotypes that you encounter in the media. So whether this is you're watching a movie or a show on TV or just even reading books, you see these characters of scientists portrayed in a particular way that's often not true to life. So we try to break some of these stereotypes by talking about the human moments in science, these funny lab traditions that develop over time, or just memories that you share with your colleagues that show that scientists are people too. So Lekki, do you have an example of one of these human side of science moments that you can tell us about to kind of go against these stereotypes?
So again, I talked to my partner about this and he said my first answer was rubbish. My answer was more, I think if you saw me, you would not necessarily think, oh, that person is a scientist. So I happened to throw a dress on today because I wasn't sure if there would be a camera, but I'm wearing a sort of a work dress with little boots that have Nightmare Before Christmas characters on, and they're very colorful. And someone, when I first wore these, said, you look like Jojo Siwa. I'm okay with this. I think that's awesome. She seems really awesome. Last week, I was in the corridor talking to one of my research assistants, and a secretary walked past and said, oh, how sweet. Have you been at a Halloween party for one of your children? And I went, no. She was like, oh. And I found it hilarious, but I just looked at her because you are very colorful. So I look different. I dressed fairly informally. In fact, today I went to the gym as I always do. I shower, I come into the office, and the showers just wouldn't turn on. So I'm very sticky, and my hair is very lank, and is probably not the image you would have. My partner thinks the funniest thing I do is I have very low tolerance for people taking other people's ideas and not giving credit. My bias is that in a mixed gender group, males will do this to females more often. I think there are some data to support that. I say that carefully. I also know not all males do it. I also know some females do it for sure. But he thinks it's sort of hilarious that I am very unabashed in correcting people about it. So I can be on a Zoom call or a phone call with very senior people, directors of large medical centers, and I'll say, well, I think we should do X. And I find there can be a tendency for, maybe it's just very senior people to say, yes, well, I think we should do X. And he's had me do it. I'm just very unabashed at going, sorry, is that like I just said? Sorry, can you point out? I'm sorry, I'm not clear how that was different from where I said X. I try to do it fairly lightheartedly and kindly, and there's a range of reactions from ignoring it. I do work with someone who's very successful, very senior. They're one of the top geneticists in America. They're number 26 by the latest ranking. And we had a mutual colleague, and I found a piece of research I thought would be very useful for this colleague, but I don't know them so well. So I brought it to the senior person, and they read it, and they said, this would be great for colleague X. And I said, I know that.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Why do you think I brought it to you?
Yeah.
And they said, well, yeah, I know you know that. I said, then why didn't you let me say that? And they just went silent. And this person I admire enormously, they're also flexible and show humility, just said, because I'm really bad at not finishing other people's sentences and taking their ideas and spouting it back at them. And only you and my wife point it out on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that is why I took it. I was like, okay, well, this was my idea. That was his suggestion for sort of, it is a serious issue, but it's pretty lighthearted. And some colleagues I work with regularly, I'll go, do I have to put you on my mansplaining board? And they're like, no. We'll just rewind and get back to that. So it's pretty fun.
Well, I love this. And I love this passion you have for making sure other people aren't stealing, whether it's your thunder or someone else's, because I think being credited for your ideas and for your contributions is so important, particularly in science, when sort of those are the metrics, the building blocks that build you up to your career for promotions and other things as well.
That's absolutely true. I also think when we cut someone off in that sense, take something away from them, perhaps it's their idea or their chance to further this idea. Sometimes it's just when someone's speaking and we finish their sentence, we lose a piece of their perspective. There's just no way they see it or we're going to say it exactly as we would because we're all different. So I think that recognition, and you can say some people see it as a chance to shine. I see it as a chance to have a voice and speak. It's really important for getting the most complete picture and the most diverse perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing these little anecdotes. I love them. And I know you are solving some big problems in science and working on some critically important questions. And I know you often run into limitations in science, unfortunately, whether it's funding or staff or technology or time or just the feasibility of the projects that you're trying to work on. So, Lekki, if we took away the barriers that normally stand in your way, what is the one research question that you would want to answer most?
I think I'd really like to design some study. It would be huge. I'd be able to get at all sorts of cognitions and responses that we couldn't now. I'd really like to look at what really matters. What really does shape us as humans? I think we have some ideas, what we eat, how we sleep, but there are also proxies for all sorts of other things and other forms of privilege. So I don't think we really know. And sometimes we might go down a rabbit hole in science of really showing a very important pathway, but it's such a tiny piece of the puzzle. And I would love to do a study that says, okay, how can we fundamentally and meaningfully change the trajectory a person is on, whether it's they want to be happier, they want to be healthier, they want to be not happier or healthy, but something else. What is shaping us as humans now in the world that we can look at improving access to? That's my driving question.
I love your idea of really what can you do to help make these impacts, to help people live the best lives possible. I think it sounds like that's the crux of your question, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm writing that down.
Yep.
I'll put that as my introduction to my application.
Oh, that is a phenomenal and a worthy cause to dedicate all of these hypothetical unlimited resources to. And I know when you're answering these big questions, it can be helpful to get advice along your career path. And I know there's a lot of people that you can receive advice from in science, these mentors, these role models, these people that you work with over the course of your career. So, Lekki, is there one piece of advice that really sticks out in your mind as just the best advice that someone gave you that you can share with me and our listeners today?
I think it was a combination of two mentors. So my postdoc shifted, as I said, when I got to Alabama. And so I ended up with two mentors, sort of one in the former project, one in the current one. And they were very, very different. And I felt one was just the sky is the limit, push, push, push. You can do anything, reach for the stars. And the other one was very grounded and very cautious and very methodical and played by the rules. And I just always took advice that I give people is reach for the stars while your feet are on the ground. You got to stay grounded, but don't let that stop you reaching for the stars. Try and put those two together.
Well, I think that is a phenomenal message and advice to share with listeners. Is there any other last piece of advice or perhaps a last note of inspiration that you would like to share at the end of our conversation today, Lekki?
I'll go back to you're doing a lot better than you think you are. Almost every human being I meet is doing a phenomenal job at everything, whether they're looking at their parenting or their food or keeping up with their checkups and that sort of medical side. And no one has all the answers. So if you're not meeting some of the answers we have, don't put undue pressure on yourself.
I think that's a phenomenal piece of advice. I think we're all kind of hard on ourselves.
So hard. And that's not good for our health, psychological health, physical health. I recognize the enormous amount of privilege I have, and I got to all the things I can do because of that. And then never underestimate the privilege of people around you and the support they had.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful note to end on. If our listeners want to learn more about you, Lekki, and the work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to do so?
If they're just doom scrolling, which we all do because they don't want to turn their light out and go to sleep, you can always just Google my name and put in Baylor College of Medicine, and they'll get a ton of links to little articles and my lab webpage. And if not, people are welcome to email me. I am very slow at email, but I do like, when I say when I lecture and teach in the undergrads, I get very excited to hear from people and very excited to see any kind of reach and see questions. And I even do get excited when people say you're wrong. I just don't think you're right about any of this in your approach. And I'm like, well, I'm really glad we're engaging. So you can email me. My email address is online, but it's awood, AWOOD at BCM for Baylor College of Medicine.edu.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely read up on Lekki's work and get in touch if you have questions or want to learn more about the amazing stuff that she's doing in the lab. And Lekki, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome. And thank you for inviting me and being very patient.
Oh, you've been a wonderful guest. And listeners, it's been phenomenal to have you here with us as well. We hope you'll join us for our next episode of People Behind the Science.